The world has made such comet-like advance lately on science, we may almost hope, before we die of sheer decay, to learn something about our infancy when lived, that great, original, broad-eyed, sunken race, whose knowledge, like the sea-sustaining rocks, hath formed the base of this world's fluctuous lore. Festus. Part 1. The History of Atlantis. Chapter 1. The Purpose of the Book. This book is an attempt to demonstrate several distinct and novel propositions. These are: 1. That there once existed in the Atlantic Ocean, opposite the mouth of the Mediterranean Sea, a large island, which was the remnant of an Atlantic continent, and known to the ancient world as Atlantis. 2. That the description of this island, given by Plato, is not, as has been long supposed, fable, but veritable history. 3. That Atlantis was the region where man first rose from a state of barbarism to civilization. 4. That it became, in the course of ages, a populous and mighty nation, from whose overflowings the shores of the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi River, the Amazon, the Pacific coast of South America, the Mediterranean, the west coast of Europe and Africa, the Baltic, the Black Sea, and the Caspian were populated by civilized nations. 5. That it was the true antediluvian world, the Garden of Eden, the Garden of the Hesperides, the Elysian fields, the gardens of Alcinous, the Misomphalus, the Olympus, the Asgard of the traditions of the ancient nations, representing a universal memory of a great land, where early mankind dwelt for ages in peace and happiness. 6. That the gods and goddesses of the ancient Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Hindus, and the Scandinavians were simply the kings, queens, and heroes of Atlantis, and the acts attributed to them in mythology are a confused recollection of real historical events. 7. That the mythology of Egypt and Peru represented the original religion of Atlantis, which was sun worship. 8. That the oldest colony formed by the Atlanteans was probably in Egypt, whose civilization was a reproduction of that of the Atlantic island. 9. That the implements of the Bronze Age of Europe were derived from Atlantis. The Atlanteans were also the first manufacturers of iron. 10. That the Phoenician alphabet, parent of all European alphabets, was derived from an Atlantis alphabet, which was also conveyed from Atlantis to the Mayas of Central America. 11. That Atlantis was the original seat of the Aryan or Indo-European family of nations, as well as of the Semitic peoples, and possibly also of the Turanian races. 12. That Atlantis perished in a terrible convulsion of nature, in which the whole island sunk into the ocean, with nearly all its inhabitants. 13. That a few persons escaped in ships and on rafts, and carried to the nations east and west the tidings of the appalling catastrophe which has survived to our own time in the flood and deluge legends of the different nations of the old and new worlds. If these propositions can be proved, they will solve many problems which now perplex mankind. They will confirm, in many respects, the statements in the opening chapters of Genesis. They will widen the area of human history. They will explain the remarkable resemblances which exist between the ancient civilizations found upon the opposite shores of the Atlantic Ocean in the old and new worlds, and they will aid us to rehabilitate the fathers of our civilization, our blood, and our fundamental ideas, the men who lived, loved, and labored ages before the Aryans descended upon India, or the Phoenician had settled in Syria, or the Goth had reached the shores of the Baltic. The fact that the story of Atlantis was for thousands of years regarded as a fable proves nothing. There is an unbelief which grows out of ignorance, as well as a skepticism which is born of intelligence. The people nearest to the past are not always those who are best informed concerning the past. For 1,000 years it was believed that the legends of the buried cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were myths. They were spoken of as, quote, the fabulous cities, end quote. For 1,000 years, the educated world did not credit the accounts given by Herodotus of the wonders of the ancient civilizations of the Nile and of Chaldea. He was called the father of liars. Even Plutarch sneered at him, now in the language of Friedrich Schlegel, quote, the deeper and more comprehensive the researches of the moderns have been, the more their regard and esteem for Herodotus has increased. Buckle says, his minute information about Egypt and Asia Minor is admitted by all geographers. There was a time when the expedition sent out by Pharaoh Necho to circumnavigate Africa was doubted, because the explorers stated that after they had progressed a certain distance, the sun was north of them. This circumstance, which then aroused suspicion, now proves to us that the Egyptian navigators had really passed the equator and anticipated by 2,100 years Vasquez da Gama in his discovery of the Cape of Good Hope. If I succeed in demonstrating the truth of the somewhat startling propositions with which I commence this chapter, it will only be by bringing to bear upon the question of Atlantis 1,000 converging lines of light from a multitude of researches made by scholars in different fields of modern thought. Further investigations and discoveries will, I trust, confirm the correctness of the conclusions at which I have arrived.